Okay, so we have the privilege to have a specialist of technologies and remix literacies, Mr. Michael Hutchman. He's an associate professor and chair of education programs at Lakehead University in Orillia, Ontario, Canada. His research focuses on digital and media literacies, cultural studies, and education in formal and non-formal settings. He's presently engaged in a funded research project on social media, democracy, and education with the actual chair, UNESCO-DCMÉT. Michael is also the Canadian co-chair of GAPMIL, North America, and is a broad member of Media Smarts. It's a Canadian Center for Digital and Media Literacy. So without further ado, I'm giving you the mic. Mr. Michael.
Excellent. Merci, Julie. So I will speak in English, but just to say good day, c'est un plaisir d'être parmi vous autres. Muy agradecido esta oportunidad de estar con todos. And yeah, very grateful for this opportunity to have the the floor. And so now I'm going to see whether you have given me hosting privileges. And I feel, oh yes, good. We have it. Very good. So yes, my presentation then is called Remix Literacies in the Digital Cage, and it's also called Remix Literacies in the Digital Age. And so I'm going to start with a little argument here, which is that, that we operate under an illusion that we control a little box, that we hold this little box in our hands, but that rather the 50%, roughly 50% of the world's population who is a regular internet user is actually living in a box. So the box is above us. The box is keeping us under its, within its confines. And that, we'll talk about what that looks like in just a moment. So this is an illusion. We're holding this thing, but it is putting us into a much bigger box than what appears. So there's different ways of looking at our circumstances. And as I said, I'll move into those, but typically it's common now to refer back to Aldous Huxley and George Orwell, and to talk about how the current age has elements of both. So Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, these are both books from the past, the 1930s. I think I know Huxley's from the 30s. I'm losing my Orwell bibliography moment here, but the thing is in Huxley, people voluntarily take this drug called soma, and so they voluntarily are drawn into this capture and control. And in Orwell, there's this omniscient state which is viewing people from above and capturing, and controlling knowledge as well as people. So arguably we have a mixture of the two today. And so I call it the New World Order, and also the Great Reset, which is something I will return to shortly, because the Great Reset is one of the conspiracy theories that's out there. And this New World Order, there's a number of corporations, sometimes referred to as just 4, but in this case, there's all 5 are listed here. So Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Google, and Microsoft. And these corporations increasingly control the flow of information and the ways that we experience the world through the media and technology that we use on an everyday basis. And the COVID store in the top right, that is actually a company that's 30, 40 years old. It's in Tempe, Arizona, and they were called Video Company. and they changed their name to, the corporate name became COVID, and now they've suddenly become relevant in a way that they never expected. So my other duty today is to open this day on this topic of global citizenship. So today is not just about media, it's actually about citizenship. And this is a little more than I can possibly take on in the time of my presentation. But I just want to say at minimum that that we're in this, that there's an impasse. And there was a great fascination on the part of many of us for this huge tanker, the Ever Given, that was stuck in the Suez Canal just over a month ago. And the enormity of it, right? It was, there's 24,000 rail cars on that boat. This is the super tanker of the 21st century. It's so big, it can't even get through the Suez Canal. And this shows something about the precarity of capitalism. 1/10 of the supply chain broke down in that time that the tanker was stuck in the canal. But it also shows us something about literacy today, because the way the world responded to this was with memes and with jokes. And so there was this positive outpouring. So the one on the far right, you can see this little backhoe, the tractor, trying to excavate this massive tanker. And that particular image set off a series of memes of a whole number of types. So yeah, to say that this world is in crisis and that they're overlapping crises, ecological. So tomorrow you will hear Gina Tezé, and on Thursday, Lucie Sauvé, both doing keynotes that will touch on the ecological crises, a health crisis, an economic crisis, a political crisis, and a crisis in media. The media itself has its own crisis moments. And just as a sort of an overlapping, I mean, this follows well along what Julie was just saying a moment ago. Julie was just saying, people make their own histories, not in conditions of their own choosing. So we're interested always in agency. As much as there is, structures that are controlling and forces that are controlling humans, we're part of our role in critical pedagogy, in liberatory praxis, is to look for those spaces of hope, the sites of possibility. So my talk today will follow roughly this outline. So when you find yourself at culture jamming, you'll know that we're getting close to the end. I'll talk about a bit here at the beginning on the digital age, some media history, something about this literacies remix, 2020 and the conspiracy theories of that year, culture jamming, and then very quickly on media literacy on the way out. And at this moment too, I'd like to thank the members of the DCMÉT Media Observatory, graduate students that have been working with me here in Orillia, at Lakehead University, Orillia. Io Whitman, who is Io and then Miranda McKee are both involved in the conference. Miranda's been the communications person, and Io's here as a rapporteur and moderator as well. And then David Van Dyke, who is not here today. But these are folks, and there's elements of their contributions in this presentation, and I wouldn't want to neglect that. Also, this opportunity to mention that there's a funded research project, which Julie just mentioned as well, the social media education. I think I'm missing the last word, but the project that I've been doing with Paul Carr and Gina Tezé, and there's already a couple of books that have come from it, but this is ongoing work. It's an international research project on social media and education, transformative education. And there'll be opportunities for people to maybe play a role in that. So in the box, okay, so we got the inside the cage. So we've got the out and the in, but what's the world look like inside? For one, we can talk about a so-called dopamine economy. So a lot of apps and a lot of programs are produced around how addictive and obsession making they are. So we have a dopamine economy, a very consumerist economy. We have a surveillance architecture. This meme is terrific. In America, you don't browse the internet browses you. So we're being datafied, we're being every one of our clicks is somehow registered. So there's this datification and this massive voluntary giving away of privacy data to these corporations who also control the flow. And the fourth element, and this is something that we see through the Cambridge Analytica sort of scandal, is the way that we've formed into echo chambers so that information, we're less knowledgeable about what other people in our community are consuming at a given moment. And there's also an element, Zeynep Tufekci, a scholar of social media, says it's like fans in a sports game. So people are cheering from one side or another rather than listening to one another. And then outside the box is very troubling, and it's very much ignored. So for one, if you look at Antonio Lopez's book on eco-media literacy, it's fresh, it's just published this year. You'll hear a lot, you'll learn a lot about the supply chain which produces the technology that we use today. But one of the core elements, there's rare minerals involved, and so the Democratic Republic of Congo is the site of where the extraction of a mineral called coltan happens. So that's only one of the various sites around the world. Lithium for batteries and the sudden strategic interest of Bolivia has been another example of how corporate capitalism is now having to expand and find these new resources. And as well, there's this idea that everything is kind of a clean technology. And so there's this myth of a cloud. And the reality is that all of this is done with hardware. There's cables under oceans, and there's storage facilities in the north, like this particular Facebook storage warehouse full of generators, which is holding data, is in the permafrost in the north of Sweden. So because the ground itself is cooling and this is so heating, they've located it there. But the estimate right now is that that the internet, the ecological impact of the internet is about 15% of the carbon footprint of the work, in the world, and it equals the aeronautic industry previous to the COVID shutdown. So, when airplanes were flying at full pace in 2019, the internet was rivaling it in terms of its energy drawdown, et cetera. So, yeah, Lopez's book, he talks about both an ecological footprint. So the media footprint is this extraction, and also the garbage side, the quick planned obsolescence and the return of these minerals now into the garbage stream, et cetera. So there's a footprint and then a mind print. And Lopez points out that these technologies are promoting consumerism, and that much of what goes on when we're in this space of interacting in the internet is learning to consume. So there's much more than simply this one item, material, artifact that's being consumed when we're consuming the media. And Lopez calls for an ecocentric view rather than an egocentric one. He says that the contemporary culture of consumption is driving an egocentric way of interacting in the world, and that we need to move towards an ecocentric one. Now, James Bridle, this is just a couple of years old, this book as well, and he's talking about that the cloud is a central metaphor and what a myth it is. So this is my second myth, as well as this idea that we hold and control this box, is the myth of the cloud. And what he points out is that it evaporates agencies and ownership. There is no sort of magic little place up there where our data goes and floats, but it actually sinks somewhere. It's more accurate. So there's a physical infrastructure, it's an industry, and as he says, it relates to certain geographies of power. Now, some of the work I'm discussing today is work I've been involved with for a long time. Some is much more recent. So data poverty, data colonialism, those are fairly new concepts to me. And I want to point out this book. This book is available free for download, and it's fresh as well. This Milan and Treri Macero, the COVID from the Margins book. So in that book, I'm teasing out the difference between data poverty and data colonialism, and it's really very useful distinction, because data colonialism follows along a little bit more the line of, say, colonization or old school cultural imperialism. Data colonialism is a way where, you know, undue influence of power centers, you know, spread their ways of seeing the world to other places. But data poverty is something entirely different, because as I'll get to in a few moments, with the Web 3.0 and the algorithm web, we are constantly contributing our input into what the choices of the future are. So when I enter into Google and I enter questions or etc., those inform future questions. So if I'm not even participating in the internet of everyday life, then I'm not influencing what it will look like in the future. Like it's very much as if today we are writing new encyclopedias. We are writing the knowledge of the future, because we are in a period where of profound change. So your data poverty is your non-participation, your invisibility. So like the people on the move, undocumented migrants, refugees, etc., are typically outside. And a really nice bit of work by a scholar, Anna Maria Neag, who's Hungarian. She's talking about Facebook groups, and she says Facebook groups are like the TripAdvisor of the refugees. And so that there's this sharing of data that happens. People come when they arrive at certain places where they can get onto Wi-Fi, they're sharing with one another important details of the journey, etc. So those are issues. And then data justice now is the movement to try to repair and to, you know, for one, study the inequality, the data inequalities, and then two, to begin to remedy it in some manner. And so some of the images here today that I share with you here, one is the Jose Maria Morelos in the middle of the Yucatan. It's a community where Yucatec Maya is still spoken on the street, and you can see it's like a computer site, like a place where you can come in and pay a few pesos and use the computer for a little while. But I'm not considering that regular use of internet, but the centrality of this particular site in that community is very striking. The young women on the bottom I photographed, and with their agreement, by the way, in San Cristobal de las Casas, but it's a very powerful image, and it compares very interestingly to similar images from the global north. But these young women in indigenous outfits looking again obsessively at their cell phones, the way people do all around the world. And on the bottom right corner, I just want to point out that the meme Invasion or Escape, Who Frames the Discourse, that's one that Paul, Gina, and I did together one afternoon when we were first talking about some of these issues. So now, algorithmic oppression, this is related to our data colonialism. So we've had some incidents in the last couple of weeks that are very powerful and illustrative. So one of them is that on May 5th, which would have been Red Dress Day, which was Red Dress Day. So it's a commemoration for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls in Canada. Certain posts went missing from Instagram. And this woman here in the middle, Shanice Steele, this is an image from Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. She was reporting on the circumstance. And Shanice also says that this happens to her more frequently as well. She calls that shadow bans, so that there's certain messages that when put online, they're not being seen by everyone. They're only being seen by maybe a few small friends. Like there's ways of limiting the ways that, you know, the width of the breadth of exposure. But at the same time, the Save Sheikh Jarrah tweet and all the Instagram posts were also removed by Instagram. So Instagram claims that they had a worldwide failure around this time in early May, and that this all happened inadvertently. And data activists totally disagree with that and say that in fact this was done purposefully. And the interesting bit of evidence here, this is an Instagram post by Bella Hadid, who's a world-known model. And Bella Hadid's father is from Palestine. So this is a photo of his US passport. And you can see here, birthplace, Palestine. And so Bella Hadid put up, "I'm proud to be Palestinian." And she was posting that. Right now, there's actually quite a lot of controversy around Bella Hadid because of this. And it was taken down. You can see that because of community guidelines, it says here, or possibly harassment or bullying. So, this is Bella Hadid's comments over here. She says, Instagram, exactly what part of me being proud of my father's birthplace of Palestine is bullying, harassment, graphic, or nudity, I guess. So basically, we have a problem, okay? This is one part of the problem when we talked about corporate control, that in fact, that now we have these extraordinary kind of magic technologies, and they're being run by particular private groups, and those private groups are making decisions. And let's go a little further with that. Let's look at how that's impacted our conference. And this is thanks to Miranda McKee, and for one, for trying to put these ads into Facebook, and then two, rounding up a bit of an analysis of it for me. But the session that will directly follow after ours here with Peter McLaren and Antonia Darder, the advertisement in Google Ads. So remember, this is different. This is Google Ads, not Google Ads, Facebook ads. This is not just a regular Facebook post. This is putting in an advertisement that will have a little bit more of a impact. So this ad was rejected 2 times, and sorry, it was the one here on the left that was rejected. So it's the critical pedagogy, presumably, and it says here we require people to confirm identity, blah blah blah. If it's about social issues, elections, or politics. Your ad may have been rejected if it mentions politicians or sensitive social issues, etc. Right? So suddenly, education as dialogue, critical pedagogy has become something that is dangerous, and it's being filtered out. Now, let's keep in mind that this is an algorithm that made that decision, right? Not a human. So the algorithm is seeking based on certain linguistic patterns that it assumes are dangerous, right? And then it'll go to a higher level review, and the higher level review means that like a human will look at it. But so eventually the ad was accepted by Facebook by taking this title out and hiding it up into the sort of top banner. Now here's 2 more that were also rejected at first and then eventually accepted. So in the case of the one on the left, this is another session for later today. I'm doing all this terrific advertising for the conference here. So this one's hard to take. Youth participation, civic engagement, and education for democracy. That was rejected. It couldn't have been challenges and opportunities, right? Because this could say, selling oranges on the street, challenges and opportunities. So it was finally accepted as what challenges and opportunities exist within citizenship education, et cetera, right? And over here, conflict in the USA, clearly, the algorithms find that one and get very excited about it. So that was rejected, and eventually this was accepted as whose democracy is it? So that's pretty amazing, right? Like we're seeing the impact of the algorithm right here on this event that we're involved with here. So yeah, Miranda helped a little more here and showed the difference between what it looks like to take the advertising light package and the advanced package. So if you're used to putting advertisements on Facebook, you will be more comfortable with a more complex sort of what do you call it, interface. And at that moment, you would have the opportunity, if you were going to post on US politics, to engage with conservative, liberal, or moderate. And I'm not exactly sure, maybe the Americans can help us with this, you know, what's moderate when it's between the Democratic and Republican Party is somehow in between there. I'm not sure. But on the light version, all we see is likely engagement with US political content conservative. So the only option for politics in the US on when you're looking at the easier to access and work with interface is to put in something that's in line with conservative political views. And as well, I want to point out here that all of these countries are present as well in these in the ad interface. So if I want to insert targeted advertising for a political campaign in Argentina, I just need to press a button and I can submit. And, you know, I mean, the algorithm will still decide whether it's going to accept it or not. But Argentina, Brazil, Chile, you know, like we're looking at our neighbors here, the people that are present today with us at this conference. So how did we get here? Let's have a little bit of a run through some historical material. There's Marshall Mcluhan on the left. And I want to say that it's important to consider theories of change so that we can't just look at the state of the board as it is right now. We have to look at what came before, and that in that way we'll have a better understanding. So I'm using de Saussure's idea of synchronic and diachronic perspective and his wonderful metaphor of the chessboard. So a little bit on how different technologies have interacted with protest movements and change movements. There's certain technologies have had a starring role in various moments, and then they've, in a way, been absorbed. So if you look at the role of television in the Vietnam War, I mean, here's in the bottom right here is Dan Rather embedded in the field, like in the killing fields in Vietnam. Like they're doing live television out there. And, you know that the television networks, once they saw what happened after that, you know, the protest movement, et cetera, that occurred, made sure that war was never exposed in that way. So that was television's moment of looking at conflict. Radio has a much broader history, and there is actually many, many examples. I just took this one, Radio Venceremos. The FMLN in El Salvador, you know, used mobile radio stations as a way to communicate. And these, in this case, it's to give a different perspective other than the official discourse, right? The fax machine had its moment with Tiananmen Square. The early computer, the use of computer disks by Subcomandante Marcos, who's here in the middle, and the Zapatistas to smuggle out sort of news briefings from the Lacandon jungle in Mexico to be given to sympathetic journalists from around the world. And then the use of social media during the Arab Spring. So Zeynep Tufekci's book here is a really great account of some of what happened there. And we know that it's, you know, that there's limitations, that in fact, you know, that there's this way of making the involvement of social media sound more impactful than it was, but nonetheless, the stories are very important, and it was that moment. And then back to our little box, looking at it as having component pieces. So we're looking now at a cultural history of technology from 1848 to the present. So we're incorporating that technology of the telegraph, the Brownie camera, the television, and all of that landing into our hands. Another theory of change is the idea that at any given moment, we have the past and the future embedded into the present moment. So that there can be a dominant way of doing things. In this case, you look at the blogger here with the coffee cup as being sort of the dominant, you know, I've got the laptop, and but there's still, in it is embedded the old typewriter, which is our residual in this case. And then we have this emergent multimodal author, right? Who's able to incorporate video and cameras, et cetera, into their address. So literacy itself is changing. But with Williams, we're also able to look at ideology and how, you know, dominant, residual, and emergent are all present together at a given moment. So one thing today, we hear so much about fake news, and we'll learn here that in fact fake news is not new. Here's an advertisement from an American newspaper in 1897 saying that they print no fake news. Here's from a magazine in 1894 in New England that they're not like that fake news. And then the very well-known example of Nazi Germany, which also had that theory of that the news was lying. That's the lying press. So when we look at the fake news discourse today, there's always this idea that there was some past from which we've fallen, you know? And I just want to point out here, this is the 1930s in a newsstand in New York City. So there, you know, some of the elements of that is that there's a common discourse within a public sphere in a democratic space. So think of Benedict Anderson's Imagined Communities. Like the centrality of that to the way that there's a social cohesion is crucial. But nonetheless, this was a social cohesion, which is a little bit like when, you know, when we talk about ancient Greece, like democracy for whom? You know, who was part of that democracy and who was excluded in that particular case? So, you know, the argument that I'm making is that this was news from the perspective of the colonizer, that in fact, many people were excluded from this, from what was news of the day. And specifically, look at indigenous communities in North America and ask yourself, was there ever a time in those periods when they could count on the newspaper having their perspective embedded in it? For Black communities in Canada and the United States, was there ever a time where there was this some certainty that the perspective of that community would be embedded in the newspaper? And the answer is no. And when you think also as well that, you know, feminism shows up in 1970, that, or I mean, it doesn't show up in 1970, that sounds naive, but I mean, that, put it this way, there's this period before 1970 where women weren't allowed to hold a credit card, were not allowed to hold a mortgage. Like there was a period when women were less than men in terms of, you know, some of the social status in North America. And so, you know, whose news are we really coveting at that moment? Another really important element to all this is that lying and manipulation is not new. So we look so much at, you know, the government of number 45, Mr. Trump, you know, but the reality is that for many years, there's the embeddedness of lies in the media is something that is well known. For example, the PR firm from California, Hill and Knowlton, planting the story of Kuwaiti babies being, you know, in the Iraqi soldiers were unplugging the Kuwaiti babies in a hospital. They were taking away their medical control. Or there's a typical strategy on the part of powerful people would be to announce something on the front page of a newspaper, then retract it a few days later. So this was well known when Alexander Haig, the Secretary of State of the United States, accused the Sandinistas of providing arms to El Salvador. And it was a fabrication, and it was just taken away a few days later. But then the role of big oil, the role of big tobacco, and now cell phones, of putting research out there that's non-existent, et cetera. Like these are all older forms of manipulation. And then creating think tanks. This is a type of astroturfing, like creating an organization which will then provide the research findings that we need. And also knowing all along that corporate interests are embedded in those media products. In there's a little more too to actually how journalism itself has been structured and how journalism itself allowed itself to, you know, is a manipulatable space the idea of myth of balance. Once I've got one person on this side and that side, the story's done. The idea that there's certain people that I'll go to first, the primary definers, as Stuart Hall calls them, that there's certain authorities get my attention as a journalist, and then that I'll listen to advertisers. I won't publish. For example, environmentalists have found this many times, that their perspective is not published because there's a concern, a certain advertiser is worried about the community standards. And yeah, I won't, TV news was first initially produced as a form of a community service, and it became a spectacle on it during the 20th century. So here in the 21st century, we now have this, instead of a very controlled media environment, we have this widely dispersed, fragmented one. And there's an important image here on the left here. You could see Breitbart.com, that's a right-wing media source, and see its influence is roughly the size of the ball. YouTube and Google are here, and Amazon and New York Times and Washington Post, but this is still a pretty big influence. And over here on the right as well, there's been lots of good work showing the ecosystem of the right-wing media. So I can't get into that in any great depth. So another theory of change is the idea of a paradigm shift. First of all, I just want to point out that this image from the Jetsons from 1963 is predicting today's video doctor visits that we're having now. So it's pretty extraordinary. Little bit of prediction there, but Thomas Kuhn, the idea of the structure of scientific revolutions, some change is evolutionary, but the big change is revolutionary. Paradigms change. And the paradigm I would just want to point to, and this relates to this idea of remixed literacies, is that one that changes in 2003 when YouTube, Napster, it was MySpace at the time, not Facebook, come along and we start to contribute the content to the web, and the web becomes a two-way space. So rather than a one-way space that's run by experts, we have a two-way space run by everyone, the people, the folk. And in that space, there's some commonalities, and I'm not going to be able to get into those in great depth, but there is story, performance, persuasion. There is totemic imagery, memes, emoticons, transmedia storytelling like this. These are some commonalities. So here we will see that literacy and modern mass media had some things in common, which was they're linear, scientific, centralized, one way. They're also a thing, they're an artifact, and they're durable. Versus orality and media 2.0, we see there that they're cyclical, totemic, persuasive, performative, dispersed. It's a two-way flow. It's a process. So instead of a thing, it's a process. Now, this is important when we're moving forward. So my last theory of change is Marshall Mcluhan's Tetrad. This is actually his son, Eric Mcluhan, did this after Marshall Mcluhan's passing away. So every time there's a new technology, ask yourself, what does it enhance? What does it reverse? What does it make obsolete? And what does it revive? So in this case, that's the cell phone in the middle, the smartphone in the middle. And I don't have time to stay on that image, but let's look at what happened with the internet. So the internet has its great moments in about 1993. Okay, 1989, Tim Berners-Lee comes up with the blueprint of the internet, and it's created in 1993. Actually, the Gilberto Gil was the Minister of Culture for Brazil at a certain point. He came to Montreal, and I was there, and he said, the internet of 1993 to 2003, he says, that wasn't the internet. He said, that was something, that was, pre-internet. The internet starts when we start interacting with it. So Web 1, it's also where the boom bust happens. It's like this, it basically mimics old versions of communication. So someone produces it and then the rest of us dutifully look at it. But something very dramatic changes. Web 2, we start making the content, and Web 3, the content becomes made now through our collective intelligence, through decisions that we've previously made as a group. that tension, there's a tension involved here. Like Web 2 is liberatory. It is the participatory potential of the web is extraordinary. It's exquisite, but it's also one which has been co-opted and has become something else. So Time magazine says you are the person of the year, in 2006. And so at this moment, we see this great potential, what we can all produce together, right? But what I'm going to say here is that this has given voice to the oppressed, but it's also allowed for the return of the repressed. And so some of the voices of the oppressed, sorry, this slide didn't get translated, but autochthonous knowledges, indigenous languages, post-colonial literature, histories of women, histories of racialized minorities, indigenous peoples, these social movements, et cetera, suddenly get this ability to express, right? And unfiltered, right? I mean, until we get the algorithm telling us that they've rejected our posting, there's a potential you can create a website. Maybe nobody will come, but you can create a website and put your ideas there. But as well, we've had the return of the repress. So we saw this first with Gamergate, but these angry men using this technology to then bait other people. And, women in politics today, it's almost impossible to be a woman in politics without having the most vile things said and the threats, et cetera. So in this moment, the Web 2 allows, beauty and love, but it allows hate and vitriol. And some of this is predicted in Andrew Keene's book, Cult of the Amateur. The book is I give it a mixed review, but he did say that the breakdown of the economic model for contemporary journalism would happen, and that, in fact, that where we were heading could be quite chaotic. So I'll leave you that meme on the side. Algorithms then, 2013 onwards. I created this one here on the left. It's the book by Cathy O'Neill. She's in that coded, Coded Bias? There's a new Netflix documentary she's in it. So this is my screen, this Weapons of Math Destruction. So it's deciding based on some of my previous purchases what I might want to read, but also what other people who purchased the same thing might want to read. So Cathy's argument is that, everybody makes this look so complicated, but it's not. So, algorithms are opaque, taken for granted, and poorly understood. They're the realm of experts, and they're much too complex for everyday people. And Cathy actually explains an algorithm or two as just a series, decisions that you take and that they get embedded into a machine learning environment, right? But Google decides for us that these are so complicated that we wouldn't understand them with anything other than these pictographs. So what you see there on Google is the history of the last 10 years of its major algorithm updates. That's what it is right there. Panda, they improved quality. Penguin, they reduced spam. Hummingbird, they worked on improving their accuracy. Like this goes on and on. Fred Flintstone, this is in 2017. Flintstone is to try to react to clickbait, aggressive monetization. I mean, this stuff is so complicated that the only way I can explain it to you is by not telling you what it means and showing you these cute little pictures. So I'm afraid I don't know if Julie is getting concerned here about the time, but I'm going to try to bring this together in 5 minutes. I'm sorry if it's going a little longer than expected, but so what are these algorithms and what are they exposing? So there's this famous moment here, the 3 teenagers in 2016. So this was found by somebody. They're like, whoa, wait a minute here. Look, I typed in these searches and up came these various options. And Google's response was, well, it's not us that are racist, it's you. You've plugged in all that information, and this is just simply drawing it back out. And they did tweak the algorithm to make sure this didn't happen again, or at least that particular case wouldn't replicate, right? But But it is a very interesting question. Like if the culture is fundamentally racist, then is it not the case that algorithms are going to, produce and discover, racialized evidence? So what is an algorithm? It's a set of rules, defines a sequence of operations. It's a predictive mechanism. It's a lot like weather forecasting. So James Bridle, in that book I showed you earlier, he says, we can transform history into a mathematical equation, and then it will produce the future. So that's what, all these algorithms and those choices, when they're showing you what you're going to watch next on Netflix, they're looking at what you did and what other people like you did, and then telling you what to do next. So then this will have an impact on everyday life. Deploying police now based on predictive policing models. So looking at crime rates in certain neighborhoods and then replying by throwing more police into those neighborhoods. That's something that's being done. Tufekci points out a really interesting example. There's a number of examples around how algorithms were abused in the Twitter and tear gas book. But so there was a big riot. It was about Michael Brown, Black Lives Matter. There was also an ice bucket challenge. People were pouring ice on each other. And in that moment, because people were responding to one another with videos, those videos were getting more attention. And that was what was being reinforced. And so those were going up higher onto everybody's list. And everybody was seeing that rather than the images of Ferguson. So yes, as I said, Google, if I look on Google and you look on Google, we'll both see something different. And that what we're doing there is we're producing the future, and we're producing what the next person will see. I can see Julie has been waving a piece of paper, but I can't see the number on it. Were you giving me, do it with your fingers, maybe. How many? Okay, very good. All right, so this is my, being given my warning. Now, this was the year of the conspiracy theory, and some of them are pretty wild. I won't be able to get into the Jewish space lasers or the Antifa lighting the California fires. I want to point out two, though: the Great Reset and the Great Replacement. So the Great Reset is that one that says that Bill Gates and Justin Trudeau and other people have got together and they've invented COVID and they've invented vaccinations, and they're going to put microchips into our arms. And the Great Great Replacement is the one which fuels January 6th, the insurrection. So Great Replacement is people living in parts of the United States where they see the number of white populations going down and racialized communities, but people of color increasing. There's this theory, and it's being proposed also on Fox News, that white people are being replaced. And that apparently is what fueled the January 6th uprising. Now, I was going to show you some of the data that we've been working on in the DCMÉT project. So obviously my warm-up act was too much, and I didn't leave time for this. But we've been looking at some of the clusters of media around COVID, Black Lives Matter, and QAnon and conspiracies. It brings me back to my own community here. There's at the top here, this is an anti-lockdown protest that happened just a week ago. And protests in other parts of Canada against vaccines. And you can see the way that people are merging every conspiracy around, like in this particular case on the right, Bill Gates' dictatorship, etc. So I'm going to have to find a way in 60 seconds to wind down this talk. So I will not mention Adamson's barbecue outside of Toronto and the lockdown and the little news story around there. And you can see QAnon in the bottom left. I will not talk about, that, and about how the Ontario government was biasing towards large corporations and not the small businesses, so that there's a little bit of something that we need to listen to from those people like Adamson. And I will not talk about the theory that IO and I came up with called TAG, where we say that one of the appeal of conspiracies is that it happens through trolls, and it happens through astroturfing, which is fake organizations, and then gamification. And part of the reason that conspiracy theories are as appealing as they are is we're drawn in through, wow, you know, to actually get, people will say, you do the research. And I will not talk about January 6th in any great depth, other than to say that the 377 people arrested in the study by University of Chicago shows that most of them were over 40 years old, most of them were men, most of them were employed. So they were very different than previous types of protests. And most of them came from states that Biden won, or many of them did, a good proportion. And that something was going on other than the typical previous type of protest. And I will pull it in one or two culture gems. K-pop stands, they're the fans of K-pop. There was this incident where Trump's rally, the K-pop fans, they reserved tickets, and so the rally was under capacity. K-pop too, when cities put out notices to have people put complaints about property damage of Black Lives Matters activists, K-pop fans fill those online spaces with K-pop videos and Google bombing. And I'm now going to just go out just pressing buttons, okay? So I won't talk, but this was our Proud Boys research, David Van Dyke's work. The hashtag was swarmed by queer activists, and they were able to overpower the Proud Boys, the militant Proud Boys, with a message of love. And we are in this period of infodemic, and Canada's top doctor is pointing that out, which is quite dramatic. And media literacy is good. Media and information literacy, UNESCO here on the left, media smarts on the right, and some conspiracy theory stuff. I'm going to call it quits there, and I'm sorry that I was too enthusiastic to keep my comments short. I probably spoke too long at the beginning, but thank you very much for your attention today.
Thank you so much, Michael. It was so interesting, and we could have listened to you for another hour, for sure. And while I'm asking people if they have questions to put it down in the chat box, I'm gonna just say that for me, I saw two great awareness in your speech, in your keynote speech. First, I think that most of us humans dive in social media with a naive view of it. And it was really enlightening for me, your presentation, the first part. It's eyes-opening, yes. And the other thing is the relation with time. I think that it is changing with the media that we see in an historic view. It's changing with the residual, emergent. We see the future changing, but in the present, we still have the past, and everything is in the internet right now. And I also see a relation with freedom. It changes the meaning of freedom. It removes freedom and it adds some freedom depending on the person, the group you're attached to. And I also see an influence and a relation with identity. And unfortunately, it is discriminating for those in need of an emerging identity and reconnaissance, like those who needs to be acknowledged and recognized. They're not having this value right now, and it's sad, but we see that there are options. And with the 50 countries that we have here, maybe we can change the algorithms. Okay, maybe I'm too naive. So let's see some of the questions that we have. I see first Jean-Noël Bérubé. In this internet digital era, could the United Nations, with the cooperation of all member countries, establish a new specific universal declaration of digital human rights? I like that. And then put in place a new dedicated international organization to implement the universal human digital standards of the current international digital world. Really interesting. To you, Michael.
Great, thank you. I mean, yes, but would it have any teeth, right? I'm thinking of the Tobin tax. I'm thinking of that 0.001 of every financial transaction, and the dream of to actually tax the stock market. You know, this is one of those things that was dreamed up and then it never happened. So right now, the Universal Declaration of Digital Human Rights, I think the problem is that we've allowed these large media corporations to grow now, where they have economies that are bigger than the GDP of many countries in the world. And you know, we need actually antitrust regulation. We need to break these groups they've become too big to manage. So the UN, like, I think the best equivalent of that declaration is what UNESCO is doing with the Media and Information Literacy Alliance. And that's been ongoing since about 2011, actually June 2011 in Fez, Morocco. I was present. I was lucky enough to be there when we founded this Media and Information Literacy movement. It's worldwide. And so that, I think, is the place. That's where we can do something together. And UNAOC, Alliance of Civilizations, UNAOC, they're the media literacy people in the UN. And that was money that was drawn out of post-Balkan conflict, right? And the dream was to let's avoid this type of conflict in the future by creating an alliance of civilizations within the United Nations. And so that is actually, there's really great media literacy work going on there.
Thank you very much. We see that some there really likes the idea of this Universal Declaration of Digital Human Rights, and we have some of them.
I'm going to take this little bit of airtime to say that this afternoon at 3:30, in the English happy hour or discussion group, Io and Miranda, two of our research assistants, will be there, and there's some some of that work I began to show is something that Io knows really well. The work on the QAnon and the anti-lockdown and the Black Lives Matter over that last year, and then Miranda's work. I'm going to give a shout out there for some amazing work on visual literacy of the COVID crisis. And if we could convince Miranda to show us, 5 or 10 minutes of that, would be really amazing. It's searing. It leaves a mark on you when you've seen it.
Awesome. It's to be continued there. We have another question or comment. En mi país hicieron la revolución por las redes sociales. La primavera chilena de octubre 2019-2021 escribiremos una nueva constitución paritaria y inclusiva. Eso es Yvette Doisy, que in her country, in Chile, in October, through the web, the social media, they established like a revolution, and they're gonna write down a new constitution. Really interesting. Would you like to comment on that, Michael?
Well, just to acknowledge it, that's brilliant. The thing is, what we're doing is we're communicating, and communicating is central to acting together. So agir ensemble, like one of the subtitles of this conference, right? So that's brilliant. And there's going to be moments like this is the tension right now in this Web 2.0. The Web 2.0 is actually, especially when it first came forward, we had so much hope for it, because this was finally an opportunity for those that haven't had a voice to find one, to have a voice. And so there's going to be moments when the media technologies are used for the social good. And that's a brilliant example. And I think in the first book that Paul and Gina and I put together, there's a chapter on the Chilean experience.
Great. We will dig into it, this book. And so I think this is it for...
I want to finish with one last comment, if I could.
Yes, of course, you may.
Well, you know, when the Trump presidency ended, Trump was thrown off of Twitter and other social media platforms. And the big concern there was, watch out, watch what we're asking for, because if Trump is thrown off, then other groups will be as well. And so when we look at this, you know, the shadow, the ways that our media is now being removed from Instagram, from Facebook, et cetera, we have to wonder whether or not we really want those organizations being the censors of the future. And interestingly enough, there was this very large network called Parler. It looks like Parler in French, Parler. And it was being hosted on an Amazon platform. And so Amazon took it down because it sees that Parler was involved with that January 6th insurrection. But, and we all might breathe a sigh of relief, like, that's good. But we have to be careful what we ask for, because what we've done is we've allowed these organizations to now take a stronger role as censors.
Yes, and another awareness that we have to be sensitive about. So thank you very much. It was, as I said, enlightening and inspiring. So there's hope. So we can be a part of this positive movement and try to change the algorithms as the Chile experience. And so I'm gonna let you go on a break, and then see you back at 10:30 in your particular session. And thanks a lot, Michael, for your time and knowledge and shared experience.